doing? Well, thank you and hello. Once again, I see an awful lot of familiar faces in the crowd, so nice to see you all. We're gonna be talking about one of my favorite things today, which is flowers, wildflowers, out at Wintergarden. I've been with the city for 23 years at this point. I started at Wintergarden. Most of my responsibilities are out there, but we also have some other places, natural areas tucked away that I'm also in charge of. So we have a prairie surrounding our community center. We have prairie out like the solar fields that need managed. So that's helping us, both of those projects help us to reduce mowing. We have a woodland wildflower habitat over at Carter Park. And we are in the process of establishing a prairie at the wastewater treatment plant. You may be noticing if you use, what is that, Dunbridge and what's the high school? Oh, yeah, so the corner of Poe and Dunbridge. You may notice that there is no longer a bunch of turf being mowed. There are lots of black-eyed Susans all over the field. Was there a question back there? Can you speak up a little bit? Yeah, I will try to speak up. Is there a microphone or? I can also just try to project more. There, now I don't have to like shout so loud. Can you hear me now? Okay, good. Good. All right, so yes, like I said, I've been with the city for a while now, and my focus has been of the restoration at Wintergarden and programming. This summer, we have had 9 camps. We're finishing our last week of camps this week. We have 10 to 15 kids this week, half-day camps usually. And it's been a lot of fun, but we also keep a lot of busy out in the parks as well, trying to take care of and manage our wildflowers. Many of the things you're going to see today are plants that were not at Wintergarden when I started working there. Many of them are new or have been established over time. And then, yes, if you have any questions as we go along, I'm basically going to take you from the middle of May to the middle of August. Some of my favorite things you will see while you're out on the trails. So most of you, many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the lupin. It's one of our claims to fame. Around the middle of May, this plant goes nuts throughout the sandy areas, the sandy open areas of our preserve. This was a potentially threatened plant in the state of Ohio, mostly because the habitat itself is rare. We don't have a lot of sandy open areas left in Northwest Ohio. So this plant was reintroduced through some projects that we partnered with at PGSU. And it didn't take long as we keep the area mowed or burned periodically, it can really fill in. I also forgot to mention a lot of these pictures today were taken by my friend Sherry Wardaball. There's a handful in here from Greg Predmore, if you know him. And then there's a handful from myself. But anyway, so there's our lupin. There's what it looks like up close. It is in the pea family. It's a legume. So yes, it might look like a little pea flower to you. And then when the seed pod dries up, it actually dries and curls and the seeds actually pop and it like explodes and shoots the seeds off. And so if you're out there on a dry enough day in the middle of June, you can actually hear these little pods crack and spit their seeds out, and they sort of spit them a good 3-4 feet away. So that's their seed projectile or reproduction mechanism. Iris, blue flag iris. Sometimes you still see this in the ditches. This was another plant we reintroduced around the edges of our wetland. I can still remember the day I planted these with a bunch of high school students and Jody Anderson, who worked at the high school for a number of years. This is one that's not real common or known. It hikes to hide along the edges of the savanna. It's a little cinquefoil. It is in the rose family, and it's a neat little plant to come across. You might recognize a lot of these plants. Oftentimes, plants that are native wild prairie plants have also become cultivated and have been incorporated into our yards over the years. Has anyone ever grown spiderwort in their yard? Yes. Did it get a little out of hand a couple of times? It can be, and in a garden setting, a lot of these prairie plants can be very fruitful and multiply. So a lot of times when I transition some of these plants into landscaping settings, it's a matter of certain plant combinations and knowing how they behave in the wild so that you can manage them appropriately in your yard. And I've been doing a lot of that kind of stuff in my own yard for years. My yard actually came with this plant, and it does, you don't need to help them. But it's not as aggressive in prairie settings because it has all the competition from all the other plants. This is a picture of our solar fields. Off to the left would be where the solar fields are. So this is looking out through the prairie area in the direction of some farm fields. I couldn't find a good picture of golden Alexanders or penstemon, but you can see the yellow plant in here that looks like Queen Anne's lace is a native variety of wild carrot type plant. And so like people who really like to have Queen Anne's lace in their wild habitats out in the country for swallowtails, this is a really good substitute, especially if you live in town. Now, it can get very seedy as well. But again, when gardening with prairie plants, you package them together in small areas and then let them have their zone. It's a lot easier to work with them. The other one is, the white one is the penstemon. There are, of course, garden varieties of that as well. And it's a really nice one for hummingbirds, if you want to help attract those. I have a lot of really cool pictures in this slideshow. A lot of them have the insects along with them. A lot of these plants are pollinator favorites, beneficial for all of our butterflies, bees, beetles, things like that. So daisy fleabane is a plant you will find in old farm fields and in prairies. It's an early successional species. And I had to, because there are so many butterflies and some of them look very similar, I had to make sure to keep my cheat sheet handy here. But we've got both of, if I know you guys will ask, the spring azure on the left and the American copper on the right, using our daisy fleabanes. And a lot of times people, that there's many types of fleabanes. There's also many types of white asters, but for the most part, if you're seeing something that looks like this in the early summer, it is probably a fleabane. And then towards the end of the slideshow, I'll show you some white asters. Again, there's a lot of different species of them. But asters tend to be a fall blooming plant. So sometimes when trying to figure out what plant am I looking at, you can also look at the season and the habitat. Oops, did I do that one? Okay. This is my favorite, butterfly weed. Has anyone, I'm sure, has anyone ever seen this plant before? Okay, there's a couple of you up there. Butterfly weed is a milkweed, but it is not a root spreader like the common milkweed. It also likes it very sandy. And just like the name implies, it really does pull in the butterflies. It is strong butterfly attractive. So we've got, these are called leather wings on the right. They are a type of lightning bug. You can see they camouflage quite well on the flowers. And then we've got our swallowtails, both the tiger and the spice bush. And then on the right is a little butterfly called a pearl crescent. And again, milkweeds, all milkweed plants. We have like at least 5 different kinds, I think, at Wintergarden are used by the monarch butterfly. And we have not been seeing a lot of monarchs this year. The numbers do seem to be down a little, but we all need to keep planting milkweed. I mean, pockets of milkweed everywhere. We don't want the common milkweed in the farmer's fields. I know that that is, that could have a long history. But we need it growing other places so that we can support some of these wonderful insects. And then on the right, I went ahead and snuck in the slide of what it looks like later in the fall, and it has that milkweed pod, but it's very skinny and narrow compared to other milkweed. Black-eyed Susans, they're a neat one. I'm sure most of you are familiar with them. In our prairie plantings that we are working to reestablish, this likes to show off for the first couple of years and kind of holds space for all those other prairie plants that are spending more time working on their roots than they are growing above ground for the first couple of years. And then as you watch a prairie over time, as it develops, you will notice by about year 3 and 4, you will see a lot less of this and a lot more diversity and a lot more evidence of the tall grasses. Wild roses, we have a handful of these out at Wintergarden. Oh, and these are our brambles, also known as the wild blackberry. We have several different of these out of Wintergarden. There's the wild blackberry, wild black raspberry. There's also one called dewberry or thin tangle. So it's like a blackberry that grows along the ground. And hence the name shin tangle, because if you're walking off trail in part of the park, you will get your shins ripped up. Then they're done now. So we'll try to this plant can be very aggressive again because it's early successional. So when we do summer mowings out at Wintergarden, the attempt is to pretend to be the buffalo, and we are munching on some of these plants where we want to balance the amount of plants out there. So we want to decrease things like blackberry and sumac, and we want to increase some of this wildflower diversity. So I don't think it's weird. People are like, why are we mowing in the middle of summer? I'm like, well, because the bison aren't here to do the job. So if we want to protect and preserve some of these other rare and unique looking things we are seeing today, we have to basically be the grazers ourselves. Yes. If you have a former farm field, or if you have an area where a tornado has come through, or a volcano has exploded, so you basically have a clean slate to start over. Plants will change over time. The first things to move in are basically, they're very weedy and aggressive things with lots of wind-blown seeds. So if you have a former farm field and farming is discontinued, usually some of the first things you see are things like Canada goldenrod, timothy grasses. Think of those things you've seen while driving around the country for years, or in hay pastures, a lot of those pastures and stuff like that. But then over time, birds start bringing in the cherry seeds, and you start getting cherry trees. And then over time, the squirrels are like, and they bring the acorns in that direction. So then your field becomes, a cherry woodlot, which then eventually becomes an oak hardwood forest. But that can take a good 150 to 200 years. So prairies are a habitat that are in their climax state. They can be, they wouldn't necessarily stay a prairie without things like fire or grazing. So those are disturbances that are needed. But they also, it's interesting working at Wintergarden over the years, trying to provide places for all of these rare plants and keep things in a state of flux when you're dealing with such a small space. It can be a bit of a challenge. But I'm a big believer in preserving as much biodiversity as possible. And my focus has always been on the plants because they're the foundation of the community. So, let's see. Oops, I went the wrong way. So yes, even though we love eating them and we love making pies with them, it's a catch for them too, blackberries. A lot of people are surprised to learn that we did have cactus here at the time of settlement. Now there are some debates as to whether it was here on its own accord or if it got traded from the deserts of the Southwest up this way. When we do our flower introductions, we're always trying to make it the habitat similar to what it may have looked like during the time of summer. And those are the plants we're seeking out and trying to protect. So cactus is a fun one. I actually got these from out in Fish Cemetery. So many years ago. All right, and here's our common milkweed, which if you have space big enough to let some of these grow, you can really draw in some wonderful insects and do a lot of good as far as trying to help keep our monarch population up. On the right are a bunch of little aphids, which don't really hurt the plant overall. Some people get a little worried when they see other things other than monarchs on their milkweed, but there are lots of other insects that use this plant as well. So we've got, this is a large milkweed beetle on the left, and that is what the nymphs look like on the right. You can see they're crawling all over that common milkweed pod. Lots of red and black insects on common milkweed. So then we've got, that's the small milkweed above the top. Left bottom is the milkweed tussock moth caterpillar. That's a bit of a mouthful. And they're pretty, they're cute, they're fun to watch. And then on the right is a red milkweed beetle. If you've never seen one of these before, I only see them once in a while, so you have to spend a lot of time outside. And there's some good blooming plants in the summer. Has anyone ever seen one of these little? I think this one is technically a hummingbird moth. So there's a couple of little moths that look like this. So it flies like a hummingbird, but it also kind of looks like a bumblebee. There's one called a bumblebee moth. You can see right through the wings. And it's got an amazingly long proboscis for drinking from those flowers. But it does kind of buzz around. If you're not paying attention, it comes out of nowhere. You might be like, oh my gosh, giant bumblebee, but it's perfectly harmless. This is a milkweed that is very similar to the common milkweed. It's called Sullivan's milkweed. And the differences are kind of subtle. It's a little brighter pink. There are less flowers, and each one of those inflorescence is kind of large. And the leaves are a lot more, they're not as soft and gray looking, they're a little more vivid, and they tend to have this stripe down the middle, which is kind of hard to see in any of the leaves there, but it's a little more, it's like a vivid pink thing. So sometimes wildflowers can be really, really easy to identify, and then there are other times where some of these plants look so similar to one another, or there's 4 or 5 plants that all look the same. It can be hard to learn how to discern between all of them. And yeah. This one is our swamp milkweed. As the name implies, it likes it in the wetter areas of the park. And you can see its foliage is a little different, longer, skinnier leaves. It's a little bit of a lighter pink, but definitely an insect magnet. This one that's on the swamp milkweed, that is a variegated perennial. And then on the right is a giant swamp milkweed beetle. So it's named after the actual swamp milkweed itself. Although I think this picture has it on a common milkweed, so I don't think it doesn't stay true to its name. It will go to any of the milkweeds. These are actually called brown-eyed Susans. Has anyone heard of brown-eyed Susans as opposed to black-eyed Susans? I see some head nods yes, some say no. It's got the petals are a little shorter. The leaves are obviously a little different. I really like this one. It's a fun one. And you can see we've got all kinds of wonderful little critters that are having fun on some brown-eyed Susans. And I was not able to discern exactly what type of sulfur butterfly that is, but it is a sulfur butterfly. The plant that was in the background with the brown-eyed Susans blooming at the same time, this is called flowering spurge. A lot of people refer to this as the baby's breath of the prairie. It does look very baby's breath like, likes it really in the sandy areas, sandy open areas. And it makes this very tiny little seed pod that's very, very hard and it's interesting to watch it through the season. And we've got, this one is an eastern tailed blue. You'll notice a lot of these butterflies, they're very fine details to be able to tell, like between the eastern tailed blue and that spring azure we saw a few minutes ago. This is a really neat plant. This one came with the park. This is dotted horse mint. It's a potentially threatened plant for the state of Ohio as well. At least last I knew it was listed. I haven't checked the list lately. But this actually held on around the edges of the farm field. So when farming was discontinued, this plant actually became quite prolific. And you will see a lot of this up into Michigan. And again, part of the reason some of these plants are rare is because of the sandy habitat is rare in Ohio.
Yes, big does that grow?
It grows about knee high. And it really doesn't like competition. It likes disturbance. So one of the things I've been toying with at Wintergarden is that, you know, we have to mow periodically, we burn periodically. But at what point do we need to actually simulate soil disturbance? Because there would have been a lot more animals historically that would have been walking around and kind of scratching up the soil. I mean, think of how big a bison is and a moose and things like that. You know, kind of their hooves tearing up the soil. And that's where these plants would tend to be, is where things like that disturbance was happening. So we actually have seen a decrease in this in the park in the last few years because of a lot of the little blue stem grasses and things like that are taking over. So again, it's like this eater totter effect, trying to figure out how to protect all these plants and keep them in, you know, keep all in the small place to have a lot of flowers. So this one's called New Jersey tea. There are some shrubs in the prairies and around the edges that tend to bloom throughout the summer. I didn't think about this earlier, but you know, the difference between spring wildflowers and summer wildflowers, there's a big habitat difference. I've been asked to do programs on spring wildflowers for many, many, many years because we all come out of winter and we're like, oh yay, spring wildflowers. It's such a wonderful thing. You go out and you experience them and they're all in the woods. All right, and there's a reason for that, it's because there's no leaves on the trees. Okay, so during the summer, the place where the sun is the brightest is out in prairie or open habitat. So that's where we focus our, you know, enjoyment of wildflowers is out in the open areas. Although there are a few plants that will be blooming kind of big and showy in the woods. I think I did sneak in a couple of those here in a couple of slides. Anyway, this is a great pollinator magnet. It's a fun one. This is tall Indian plantain. And you can see it does get very, very tall. It has some fun leaves. If you're ever out in the park, there is some along the edge of the trail. I always like to feel the leaves. They're kind of thick and waxy. I play with them with the kids. Buttonbush is another shrub you will find out in the park that blooms. This is along our wetland edges. Makes a great rain garden plant. It does get very large. These little balls, again, full of insects. And then, so on the left is what it looks like when it's blooming up close. Some people say it looks like a little sputnik. And then on the right, you can see it is transitioning to its seed pod. So the flowers are dying off, the seed pod is forming. And then we like to go out and play with the kids and collect them and throw them elsewhere around the wetland because they kind of crumble into little balls. And all these seeds crumble and it's kind of, it's fun. Here, this one's still in the wetland. This is a rose mallow. It is, what do you call it? Related to Rosa Sharon. That's what it reminds you of. Yeah. And so we have quite a bit of this. It's blooming right now. So you could actually go out to where the wetland is, which is a very short walk. And there is we now have a bridge or a bench at the wetland where you can sit and then you can walk back to the nature center. So on a day early in the morning or later in the evening when it's cooler out, this can be a nice nice little jaunt out to the wetland just to see these blooming right now. Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't know. I didn't grow up in Bowling Green.
Uh-huh.
How can I get to the wetland?
You know, I did not bring any maps with me today, but I can talk you through it. If you go to Wintergarden,
Yeah.
or we can get you, but there are maps of the building.
Are there?
There are maps at the building. It is one of the shortest destinations from the building. We have a lot of trails that go in a lot of different directions. We have about 120 acres now. But yes,
Thank you.
yes, if you've never been to Wintergarden before and you want to come out, please do. And you can always contact me before you come out. Even if you need a tiny escort the first time as well, just reach out to me. And I will help get you oriented before you go out on the trail, or at least take you around this short loop. So you can gradually build up to being comfortable to going, you know, out farther into the park. The nice thing about the park is that it is heavily used. We have a lot of park neighbors, we have a lot of regulars, we have a lot of eyes out there keeping them on the place. We have strategically placed benches, so there's always a place to stop and take a break. And once you learn your way around the park, you know, you can go one loop one day, go another loop another day, go for shade on the hot days, go for sun on the cold days. We really are very lucky to have one of them in Bowling Green. Wild bergamot, this is one of my favorites. There are a lot of cultivated versions of this. Has anyone ever grown one like this in their yard? Yes.
I just had one pop up this year. First, it was like, what
They
did
come
I
from a native.
No,
It can be it can be a little aggressive. It is in the mint family.
it's in.
Okay,
Nothing would grow there because the deer kept eating everything.
okay,
So I was obvious when this thing, I mean, it's tall.
nice.
And then it got a flower just like that, and I had to go in and check and see what that was.
Yes.
But they called it.
Oh, nice, nice. I really like it. I like to switch up the leaves and smell them. Does it? They smell really nice. Yes. So there's several plants in the mint family. I think I might have put the other one in.
Deer must not like it.
I don't think they're super fond of it because of the strong. Strong,
Yeah.
yeah, minty, stuff, yeah. Smells and oils. This is a classic prairie plant, the tall cone flower. Sometimes a lot of these yellow blooming things at the end of summer can be difficult to tell apart. There are an awful lot of them. But over time, you know, I've learned to slowly, one by one, memorize the difference between a lot of these things. Sometimes you need more than one plant part in order to be able to do that. You may need to be able to look at the petals and the leaves and things like that. It makes the seed head is really fun in the fall because it crumbles and it smells like mint. This isn't near the mint family. This is flat top aster. It just started blooming, so we are transitioning into our later summer flowers. It likes it a little shady, so it likes it around the building. It likes it around the edges of the prairie, around the savanna area. Blazing stars, we have at least 3 species. This one's our dense blazing star. It likes it a little wetter, heavy clay it can handle. And yes, the swallowtails just seem to really find this. This is one you may not have heard of. This is a dog bane, also known as Indian hemp. Historically, when these stems would dry out, the Native Americans could peel it and actually turn it into twine, a rope. We've done this before as projects with kids in camp. It's pretty neat. It takes quite a while just to make a little bracelet, but it is possible. And the little critter up there on the right is very specific to this plant. It's a dog bane. And yes, the only time I see it is usually on the actual dog bane. It likes it a little bit in the wind. Oh, and it's related to the milkweed. You can see those long skinny pods actually crack open and have a little fluff that flies away, just like a milkweed would. called Coreopsis, also known as tick seed. This is one called Canada tick trefoil. We introduced this once to the park and I never had to put any more seeds out ever again. It has spread all on its own. It makes these tiny little seeds that are like Velcro and they look like little triangles. And they do attach to you. So we got this from one of the county parks early on, but it's a legume too. It has that T-shaped flower. And it's out there doing its thing like the lupin and some of the other plants that are in the legume family. Here's one of our woodland ones. This is our jewel weed, also known as touch me not. This is one I still have vivid memories of as a kid going out, if you ever going out and squeeze the seed and the seed explodes. No, it's a neat plant. So it grows in the woods. It grew in my ditch as a kid. And so I would just go for walks and just pinch every single one until they had all popped. But yeah, it's also the juices of this plant can be used to help with poison ivy relief. This one's called ghost pipe and it would be found in the woods. Have you seen this one before?
I haven't seen it other than pictures.
Pictures. Yeah. I had some people the other day out at the preserve who were so excited. They finally got to meet this plant. It's doing really well this year. So in the woods, along the edges of the trail, under some of the green leaves, if you're paying attention, you will see this. It does stick out if you're kind of watching down along low on where your feet are. So it is a flowering plant. It is not a fungus, but it likes it. It has no chlorophyll, so it's a parasite. It is getting its nutrients off the roots, something else. But it's only bugs. So grasses are the backbone of a prairie. And we don't have nearly as much grass variety as we do flower variety, and that's pretty standard for prairie habitats. So that one's broom sedge. We've got one called little blue stem, which really does bring a beautiful hue to the prairie in the fall. We've got one called big blue stem, and yes, the difference between little blue stem is little blue stem gets about this tall. Big blue stem can even be a little taller than I am. And then we've got one called Indian grass. This is one of my favorite ones to collect. The seeds are very fluffy and they're very plumy. And so these are some of the plants that we have been harvesting on site after we got them established, and we have been redistributing throughout the park for the last 20 years. And there's a close-up of the Indian grass. You can see they are little tiny itty bitty flowering plants. This one's called cordgrass. We find this one in the wetland. I think it's hard to see, but I think there's some cattails hiding in there with it. World loosestrife. So you may have heard of purple loosestrife, which is one of the things a lot of people in my profession try to keep out of Lake Erie or ponds or river edges in this area because it can be very aggressive. But we do have some native loosestrifes, and this one's called world loosestrife. Actually, shorter plant. This one was actually found in the park, and it just kind of moves around. Every once in a while, it'll just pop up over here for a few years, then it'll pop up over there. So it's always kind of a treat when your eye catches it, because they are pretty small little flowers. And this one probably needs no introduction. It is also going to turn into a cultivar plant, but the wild virgin is really beautiful. It does like it a little shady and a little much wetter on the wet side. It was a hard one to reintroduce into the park, but I think I finally found a couple places where it likes it. There's in the southern part of the park, there's a tiny little boardwalk over a small wet area where the cardinal flower has filled in. And if you hit that part of the park at the right time of day, you'll see 2 or 3 hummingbirds buzzing around, checking them out. And it's nice to sometimes see hummingbirds out in the natural environment, drinking from natural flowers, as opposed to just always at our bird feeders. So. There. Partridge Peak. So this one, the thing about this one is this is actually an annual plant. And if you know much about plants and gardening and annuals versus perennials, an annual has to reseed itself every year. And a perennial plant grows back from the roots every year. So you plant it once and it comes back over and over again. Most prairie plants are perennial plants. There are very few annuals, but this is one of the handful of annuals you can find out there. This one is a vervain. A lot of times we see this in the ditches still. Has anyone ever seen this one while driving around the county? Okay, good, because you're keeping your eyes on the road. I drive places, like I have to remind myself to keep my eyes on the road. That's why I like it. Okay, first of all, I like it when my husband drives because then I can stare at all the flowers and the trees up and down. But now both of my kids drive. So now it's like, now I don't have to, I can do the same thing. This one's called fragrant everlasting or pearly everlasting. You can call it either one. A lot of times plants have more than one common name. And because of the name, you can imagine it when you play with the plant and you smell your hands, it smells like maple syrup. This is a wild gerardia. And then there's the thistles, which we do actually have some native thistles. They are not nearly as aggressive as Canada thistle is. The birds love the seeds. The fluff is very important for birds in their nests. So this one is a field thistle. And this is another one of our native loose stripes. This one's called monkey flower. I'm not sure why. I should look that one up again sometime. But it likes it in the wetland. You can see it's growing right through the boardwalk there. That was the best picture we have of it is it's growing through the boardwalk. Bone set, which yes, historically they believed that you could use this to help with bones that had broken. Thimbleweed. So this one is a neat one that I didn't have any pictures of it in its flowering form. It's a very small little white flower. I walk by it all the time without realizing it's even there half the time, but you don't miss it when it goes to seed. So they're very soft, big of a thimble and fluky, and they fly away like that. This is one, a classic prairie plant called prairie dock. And it's a neat one that's in the sunflower family. So you can see it's got some neat seeds there in the bottom. Once it does finally dry out and open up. Let's see. We've got a fritillaria of some sort on it on the right there. Not sure which kind of fritillaria. And then the less artistic pictures, these are mine, so that you can see just what really is going on with this plant. Again, this one will be this tall or taller. And then, so it has this stalk that shoots out from the base, and the leaves are ginormous. They're like a big fan. So you'll see the leaves growing for a long time. And then like last week, all of a sudden there were stalks this time. I don't know where. Prairie dock. It's a fun one. More yellow things in the aster family. So this is woodland sunflower. It likes it part shade. I have a lot of this growing at my house along a fence line. The goldfinches do a number on it in the fall. So it also makes a good yarn plant, I believe, and it fills in. It'll fill in nicely because it will spread by the roots as well. This is tall or giant sunflower. There's also one called sawtooth sunflower. And sometimes these plants, they could be two different species, but they can also hybridize. So, you know, like I said, sometimes it's really easy to tell plants apart, and sometimes you have to like really study it. And I think in the end, I couldn't decide which plant it was. You can see again how tall this one gets. This is much shorter sunflower. This is western sunflower. It has already finished up. It only gets about this tall, but it spreads by its roots and it really likes it in the sand. So if you have sandy soil, this could be a good addition to your yard. Ovidia plant. It can be, it grows by its roots as well. It really fills in the wetland. It's getting ready to bloom out there. We do have some native yarrows out in the preserve. Blazing stars. This is a case of they look like the same plant, but the one on the left is a different species than the one on the right and the one we saw earlier. So we've got rough blazing star and scaly blazing star. They take turns blooming. They both like it in the sand. Evening primrose. And on the right there is an evening primrose moth that you can't really see. He's hiding in there. He's doing his thing at night. But I love the pink.
Yeah.
And you don't see them very often. First of all, you have to be out at night and have one of these plants. I don't think I've even met that moth in person. These are my friend's pictures. New England aster. When you start seeing the New England aster bloom, you know you're starting to wind down. Summer's starting to come to a close, and the beginning of the end of. Yeah. These plants, a lot of these plants you're gonna see in the next couple of slides, they're very important for monarchs that are migrating at the end of the season. We've got some other ones. I think we've got an American or painted lady and the silver spotted skipper getting some of their last meals of the year. Joe Pyeweed. Some of you might be familiar, that's always been popular for the butterflies. And then I think we've got a great spangled fritillary and more monarchs. Here are those asters. You can see I did put one little, you can see how fluffy their seeds get. But there are so many varieties of asters, and asters are very difficult to tell apart. So I'm not going to tell you which one this is, other than it is one of the white asters that blooms in the fall. And we've got, let's see, we've got a checkered skipper and an American copper nectarines. Blue lobelia. It's a neat one, likes to grow near our wetland. It's kind of short. Sometimes you have to look for it hiding along the edges. And yes, this is goldenrod. We have a lot of, there are many different species of goldenrod. Canada goldenrod is technically native, but it is very aggressive. I know it has a bad rap. It is good for our pollinators. Of course, my goal at Wintergarden is variety. So there have been times where we have strategically mowed to try to decrease the amount of Canada goldenrod and increase variety. But there are also goldenrods that are endangered plants. So I put the seed head on the right there. So I know a lot of people think that they are allergic to goldenrods, and when they are in seed form, I'm sure that the seed, the fluff, the dust can be very aggravating for some people, as all of these kind of fluffy seeds are. But goldenrod is not wind pollinated. So when people think that their allergies are a result of goldenrod, it's actually other plants that are doing that. It's just for decades. People have misunderstood. Goldenrod is not what gives you allergies in August. These are insect pollinated. So it's the ragweed, the nondescript ragweed that is growing next to it. That is what is giving you your allergies. But I won't deny that once it hits seed form, that's got to be an irritant too. So if you live near a field where lots of things are going to seed like that at the same time. So here's a lovely sulfur that's found in goldenrod, a locust borer, and a yellow colored scrape moth. I'm not even sure if I'm saying that one, but I like it's really feathery and fancy. We've got another, I think that was a painted lady and a hair streak. Ironweed. Is anybody not familiar with ironweed? It's a great butterfly plant. And this is, it's thinking about blooming. It has not started yet, so summer's not quite over yet. And then my last one, summer is definitely over. If you see some of this while walking around the park, this is a lot of junction. And it's really a neat one because the bumblebee has to actually literally like pry the petals for them to crawl down and to pollinate it. Does anybody have any questions? I think I rambled through like 30 flowers. 30 flower names, and I remembered them all. Not so much with insects.
The chickweed, does that come back on its own or does it have to reseed itself?
I think there are both kinds. There are perennial ones and then there are annual ones. So the one that I was showing is a perennial and it's tall. But I know there are other species that are, you have one that's got repeat.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I have another variety at home and it's
And
it's very short lived. It might have a the one I have at home is it's a tick seed too, or coreopsis, and it's very short lived. So sometimes perennials can be very long lived, like there are prairie plants that might be 40 years old.
Okay.
And then there are prairie plants that might be 2 years old. So your black-eyed Susans and some of the shorter coreopsis, they're perennials, but they may only last a few years. So yeah, they need to be reseeded. So not right in the
first year it only had one flower.
Okay.
This year it's got almost 5
Okay.
off of one main area.
Okay. And it may be a couple of years and you'll see it and then eventually it'll peter out and then all the other ones place. Okay.
So did I cut the flowers and put the flowers back in to reseed or just?
I usually let it go naturally. The goldfinches never get all of them. So, but I've noticed how mine is moving down my slope as the flowers go like this. So you can always take some of the seeds and put them back or hold on to a handful of seeds and then put them out in the spring. And you start to, if you want to try to keep the population up. Okay.
I've been fighting for 18 years and I can't get rid of the raspberry. They never flower, but they just have the loveliest. Was all them. I tried digging them out, and they just, they're horrible. It's a damn fight.
Is it in like your landscaping or?
Yeah.
Okay.
And like when we have a dry spell and you'll have to mow, they'll start growing up out of the grass.
They are very resilient. Yes, it takes a lot of diligence to try to exhaust the root system of something like a blackberry. It is very hard. Sometimes, I mean, there's a reason why in the restoration profession, we do resort to chemicals when we have to. But at the same time, if you time it right, and you mow them or cut them enough times, you can exhaust the root system. So
I love to just pop right up in the middle of my perennials. So it's kind of hard to.
if you don't want to sacrifice the perennial, and yeah. So, you might try digging some up in the fall, so you can really get the root, and then put your perennial back in the ground, because like if that root is going underneath your perennial, then it's just rebuilding that strength every year and coming back the next year. So yeah, and then do it again, midsummer, do it again next fall. You have any grandkids? Because that's what I'm doing. Dig it up again.
The one where that for a that live off the roots of other plants. Is there a benefit to the host plant?
I don't think so. I think
Oftentimes there's one.
mutually beneficial relationship. Maybe there is. I would have to look that one up again, but I didn't off the top of my head, and I don't remember there being one.
And then I the firewood. Because I grew up in the region, I went back from the my mother from somebody else who didn't know It's like, what is Iowa, Natalie. And so one spring, I took some from Mom's garden and took it to Flower Community Unitarian Universal Court. They have a procedure, and everybody brings a flower that wants to. They have some, you didn't bring one, but. And I knew there were several master gardeners in the congregation, so, you know, sure enough, one of them picked it. Oh, this is, she knew what it was. I finally had a name for it. But the real question was that after a number of years, some of them started getting kind of reddish, kind of wine color. Have you ever seen that? Right, not all of them.
I've seen and heard about flower coloration and changes and that it's possible that the things in the soil can affect the color of a plant. So,
Well, and that would do it. Mom had moved to town, was in an apartment adjacent to the nursing home where Daddy was the resident, where they knew how she could have a garden, right, a little farm. And so close to the building that, yeah, hey, it wasn't like the farm at home.
yeah, sometimes the other thing I thought of was some of these plants that can be a little aggressive with their seeds. Like the spiderwort, I will come through and cut the flowers off right when they're done blooming before they can make seeds. Because I really do like the plant but I also don't want to take it over the garden. So, but then that's one of those things that takes a little more time to manage a garden. So that's what you're into. But if you're into low maintenance landscaping, you may not want to some of those plants.
The bergamot that we saw, does that reseed itself? Okay,
And it will fill in.
that's fine.
So if you have a spot, you can let it go rogue, you're going to really help the pollinators.
Awesome.
So, did you have one?
This maybe this isn't even true, but is there a theory as to why some wildflowers are yellow?
I know that there's a big theme with yellow and purple. Like you'll notice, like when we went through the slideshow from the beginning through the fall, there's lots of yellow and purple. They seem to and they coincide all summer long. I do think that there's insects see things differently though. So, you know, what we see as yellow or we see as purple, they're seen a little differently. So, but I think yellow, I mean, it's bright, it's attractive.
Or do we assume they see?
They may see it different than us. So, and it's been a long time since I've seen any of those documentaries that kind of go into the scientific reasoning or what things may look like to them.
But also, what is a good way to activate butterfly?
That one is hard.
We have one and then never seems to get any babies.
Your best bet is probably just to buy more plugs of it from the county parks. And even they struggle to get it to propagate sometimes.
So the idea of like the seed.
You could try. You could definitely try that. But yeah, it seems to be a finicky one. Yes.
Is there a way to get rid of morning glory? I have tried year after year after year. And the guy that does my landscape, he's done different things every year. And still I have them growing up the fence, and then they get into your other bushes and wrap around and everything else.
It's really hard to be diligent with some of these weeds. I mean, I tried paying big bucks to my teenager. And I still can't get her to help me keep up with them. And it's hard.
I mean, there's not so much of it this year, but still I go out with Roundup and.
Yeah, because that one's a perennial too. But yeah, and part of me wonders like, you know, how many of the seeds are being dispersed from somewhere nearby? You know, like are the birds eating them and then they're going to the bathroom in your yard? Like seeds travel. So, but yeah, my infestation is so bad, I don't know that it's. All I can do is just keep trying. To keep
That's
up.
the only thing I have trouble with.
Yeah.
Is that. I should like them, they are pretty, but I just, you know,
They really do strangle other things though.
they do.
Yes.
There was a yellow flower. I don't remember what you called it. It was just all by itself that you said was a type of rose or a family of the rose.
Oh, the cinquefoil.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
I found one in my yard just out of the blue.
I used to travel to your yard, that's neat. Do you
It's
live
amazing
near,
what keeps popping up.
do you live near any natural areas?
No, but I'm not that far apart. I mean, Wintergarden, so.
It could be that it's getting on animal fur or in their clothes or
Have a lot of deer
Yeah.
traffic.
even if they have mud in their clothes and they put the seeds in their clothes.
Is there the way to keep them from eating everything? I spent so much money on.
Trying to find a deer resistant plants is definitely what you want to try to do. Things
I've
that
been
get
trying.
deer- Yeah. No, there's no shortage of them in our community right now. I saw them for the first time. They crossed Main Street and were on my walk. And I had never seen them come that far down. Yeah, basically. So,
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much, and you know where to find me if you have any more questions.